there a problem with? Hello, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm just giving it a few more seconds because I see lots of people joining us, and it just takes a little while to get everyone in from the waiting room. So please bear with us just for a second. So, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to Conference Conversations, an interactive online talk show where we discuss key issues and questions related to the work of the Conference on the Future of Europe on a regular basis. These conversations are organised under the auspices of the Conference Observatory, a joint initiative by the Bertelsmann Stiftung, the European Policy Centre, the King Baudouin Foundation and the Stiftung Mercator, which aims to observe, critically analyse and inspire the deliberations of the conference and develop proposals to improve the EU's future participatory and democratic architecture. And that is what we're going to focus on this afternoon. My name is Jackie Davis. I will be moderating this entirely interactive debate as we focus, as I said, on the future of participatory democracy in the EU. We're going to assess where we are with the conference so far, and we're going to consider, as I say, that those questions of where do we go from here in the longer term, drawing on a recently published report by the Conference Observatory's high-level advisory group. It'll be a totally interactive discussion as always. Questions from me and I hope from all of you. If you want to write your question, click on the Q&A button, not the chat, the Q&A, and please be as brief as you can. And if you wish to speak, please click on the raised hands button and I will allow your microphone when the time comes. And finally, if you want to tweet out about what you are hearing, please use the hashtag Conference Conversations. With me this afternoon, I am delighted to welcome Herman Van Rompuy, President Emeritus of the European Council, of course, President of the European Policy Centre, and co-chair of the Conference Observatory's high-level advisory group, whose report we're going to be discussing. Very honoured to welcome Anna Lührmann, who is Minister of State for Europe and Climate in the German Federal Foreign Office. Great to have you with us, Minister. Thank you so much. Janis Emmanouilidis, Director of Studies at the EPC. Dominik, Hierlemann, Senior Expert at the Bertelsmann Stiftung. And Corina Stratulat, an EPC Senior Policy Analyst. So welcome to you all. As always, want to start with a very quick scene setter, just a reminder of where we are in the process. And Corina, we're moving into what the report calls the hot phase. What do you mean by that? Where precisely are we now?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Jackie. Everything kind of seems to pale beside the full-on war raging on the EU's borders for already a month now. But in a sense, this terrible development also reinforces the importance of this conference, reminding us that to defend democracy from powerful external threats, we also have to reinvent and shore up democratic resilience within the Union, which is precisely in the spirit of this conference, whose process has continued over the past months since we've last spoken. More specifically, by the end of February, all 4 European citizens panels were completed, and the collection of contributions to the multilingual digital platform for the purpose of feeding into the plenary also wrapped up in February. So this rounds up the citizens' input part of the conference and marks the beginning of what you called the hot phase, and others, for that matter, called the hot phase of the process, in which the representative dimension of the conference will have to marry the participatory element of the exercise in order to produce a nice little outcome, we hope. More specifically, during March and April, so as we speak now, all recommendations that have emerged from the citizens panels, the national events, together with the results from the digital platform, make now the focus of discussions in the plenary to inform the final report of the conference. So this is where we are, nearing the end, if you wish.
or nearing the end of the beginning, if you wish, in terms of the process of then discussing what has come out of it. Minister, I have spoken at other conference conversations to everyone else who's with me today, but we haven't talked about it before. And so I wanted to start by just getting, before we start delving into some of the things the report looks at and the future of participatory democracy, I just want to get your assessment of where we are so far. Is the conference, I don't know what your expectations for it were and how optimistic about it you were, but is it living up to your expectations? What's your feeling about what's happened so far?
Well, first of all, we are very enthusiastic about the conference on the future of Europe. We even mentioned in our coalition treaty now of the new German government that was signed now, it seems, with all the historical shifts that are ongoing, like it was ages ago, but in fact it was only 3 months ago, where we've said that we really want to put emphasis on strengthening democracy in the EU and really want to make sure that the suggestions from the citizens in the conference on the future of Europe are taken seriously and are actually really feed into the political process. But to be frank, maybe this is an area for frank discussion. I'm not sure. I'm actually a bit disappointed by the process so far, I have to say. I mean, I only joined the process 3 months ago, so I'm really new to it, but as far as I heard, unfortunately, in the beginning of the conference on the future of Europe, we had this long discussion about procedures, and now it seems that even though we already had this long discussion, now we're still have some discussions now about how the conference can be finished, not sort of a full mutual understanding on how this can happen. And that's, of course, a bit sort of drains a bit the energy from talking about the substance. And the substance is actually great. I'm very enthusiastic about the substance. So if you really read the citizens' recommendations, I mean, they really address some of the core of what we need to do in Europe to become more resilient, to become more sovereign, both in the field of energy sovereignty, for example. I mean, that was the point that even before the war, citizens identified as a big priority with many concrete projects, also in the field of climate protection, the field of a stronger Europe in the world that speaks with one voice, that works together in the field of defense. They're really sort of many spot on recommendations. So I really hope that we manage in the coming weeks to actually work on the substance instead of sort of getting lost again in procedures. And really think about the best way how these often great recommendations can really inspire and influence the debate.
So really, if I understand you, it's about galvanizing that political process, that political will to take it up. The work's been done. We'll come back on that in a moment. But a sense that sense around it, that this matters, that it really counts, you feel is missing at the moment.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I just think the sort of what overshadows the whole discussion in the conference is still sort of the uncertainty about how the process will continue. So we really need to close that. But I mean, particularly the last plenary session in Strasbourg, where we also had Ukrainian visitors, I mean, really sort of made very clear the gravity of what we're talking about here, about making Europe also fit for a future that is maybe in a more hostile environment. So I think the sense for the gravity of the debate is there. However, in addition to sort of the procedural nuisance, we also, of course, have the problem that the general public is not very much aware and very much following the conference. So,
Indeed.
That problem we have as well.
Absolutely. Sorry, could I just say to the person who's posted a question in German in the Q&A, unfortunately, I don't speak or read German. So if you would like to repost your question in English, I would be very grateful to you.
I can translate also if you want.
Well, it'd be helpful, because I don't want to get sidetracked immediately into that. We'll wait a moment in the hope that Sandra Ulling, please, if you could post it in English, I would be immensely grateful. You talked there about getting bogged down in process, Minister, and Corina, the report that that draws on the discussions of the high-level advisory group looked at things in three phases, looked at what worked and what hasn't worked, what now and what next. Want to come to the what next and this question of the resilience of democracy and strengthening democracy, which both you and the Minister have referred to already. But in terms of the first parts, the what's worked and what now, what are the main things? I mean, you highlight some strengths of the process, but also some weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's important to specify, Jackie, that we focused on the European citizens panels in our analysis and not on the entire process, because we considered these panels to be a key element of the participatory dimension of the conference. And our assessment is rather positive about these panels in that they managed to randomly convene in the midst of a pandemic on various occasions at different locations across the EU, as well as online, a diverse sample of some 800 European citizens who speak all EU languages, and then succeeded in engaging these citizens in a process that conforms to fundamental deliberative principles, and which delivered concrete results, concrete recommendations, 178 of them to be more specific. The cherry on the cake is then that all citizens who participated had a blast, really enjoyed themselves and relished in the opportunity of having the conference experience. Of course, this is not to say that everything was perfect, far from it, but the problems that we noticed and mentioned in the report had more to do with setup flaws that predetermined the organization of the panels before experts were even called in to design a methodology for the panels. For example, the broadness of the themes, the lack of time, the weak links between transnational and subnational debates, the ambiguity of purpose were already a given and difficult to compensate for as the panels were put in place and implemented. So these serve now as lessons for the future, and hopefully we will learn from them next time we try to do similar exercises or initiatives. Mm. As for the substance part, and so here perhaps it's not that I disagree with the minister, but I want to make the case also for the process, because we had the conference initiative not only to understand what European citizens think and want from the EU on very fundamental policy issues. We also did it in order to work with citizens and involve citizens in these decisions. And so the process is also matters, and it's important. But now, having said that, if we look at the time that is remaining, and as the conference now draws to an end, I think it's important to make good use of the input that these citizens have provided and to translate it into actionable proposals, which are substantial, but also which are the outcome of a process that is transparent and which citizens, but also everyone else can buy into. It is still, for example, very unclear how the working groups function in the plenary, and also a lot of uncertainty still hangs over what these working groups will actually produce. Equally important, and here I very much agree with the minister, is that EU institutions, especially the European Parliament, but also member states, should inject political capital in this final phase of the conference, helping to raise the stakes, to raise its visibility, and to raise more generally interest in this exercise. Otherwise, why did we bother really to do all that's been done if we're not going to showcases and if we're not going to make a big political deal out of it?
So very much, I mean, as you say, those key process questions that do need to be answered, but they need to be answered in a way, as the minister says, which doesn't get us bogged down in a whole new round of negotiations on process, but enable that transparent, actionable set of proposals to come out. I should mention, Minister, we had a conference conversations just with citizens who had taken part, citizens ambassadors. And indeed, just to echo what Corina said, they were hugely enthusiastic about the process, even if they, when you asked them, well, do you think you will be listened to? They were more, who knows, but nevertheless, this has been a great first step. So that was interesting. Herman van Rompuy, from your perspective, just in terms of the what's worked well, what lessons we learn before we discuss in broader terms where we go from here. But what for you has been good about this process? And do you share some of the frustrations that we heard the Minister express?
Thank you, Jackie. My first remark is really a commonplace. Whilst we are speaking, the world is changing and Europe is changing. So we cannot continue also with the conference as if nothing happened. So we have to take into account the different context in which we are today. At the same time, the conference is more relevant and less relevant. More relevant because the future of Europe is now at stake, the future of the European Union. And big decisions were made by the European Council in the last week, showing the unity, the determination, not being afraid of taboos, and taking unprecedented decisions. So the objective of the conference, the future of Europe, is in the heart of all our concerns today. At the same time, we are speaking about democracy. I said it in the beginning, according to all kinds of opinion polls, 20% of the Europeans in most of the countries don't believe in democracy. After all what happened in Ukraine, try to find a supporter of Putin or a supporter of authoritarian regimes. So democracy is becoming extremely relevant. And therefore, the conference has to reflect on what to do. I will come back in just a minute on this. So the conference is more relevant and at the same time is less relevant. Less relevant because there are other concerns today than the progress made or not made in the conference. We were speaking, remember, about the visibility of the conference ahead of the 24th of February. Now, of course, this visibility is always almost nil. Whether it's about life or death and peace or war. So I think that we have to reflect in the conference, but that is a really personal opinion. I have not discussed it with Janis and Corina and others. But I think this is the moment for the conference to push the pause button and see how we will proceed in the upcoming weeks and months. Going ahead according to the plan that was established before the invasion and the war in Ukraine, I think is not an option. So let's use this breathing space, and I hope that there's a breathing space. Let's use it for the conference to put their acts together and see how they, from their side, as the European Council did, can make breakthroughs and do unprecedented things. So the scenario can be adapted. We are in a time of, I would say, historic decisions, also about the future of our democracy in Europe. So let's use that this space that we have to deepen the project and to bring it much more forward than we thought.
So, but on one
I
side,
think this is really an opportunity. It's an opportunity, but I would not go ahead with the procedures already foreseen a few weeks or a few months ago. I would push on the pause button and introduce a period of reflection.
I can see the opportunity you're talking about. I could envisage a risk that we talked about a lack of momentum, a lack of political impetus. Would it ever come back if you press the pause button? Be interested to know what you think. But Dominik, from your perspective, a reaction to what you've just heard there, but also for you, when you look at what's really worked and what we need to do now, if this hot phase continues, where would you put the emphasis now, Dominik?
I mean, just to reflect on what Anna Lührmann and Herman von Rompuy was saying, I agree. So there was this big enthusiasm, and so it is still there with regard to the citizens. So they are very engaged. But when I look at mainly the political class, so they are getting bogged down in technicalities. And I was trying to understand what is going on over the last few days, and then I read a lot of non-papers, and then non-papers were pushed off the table. So first Swedish, they were garnering support, and then it's off the table again, and then the French come forward with a proposal, and so on and so on. And it's very difficult to understand for citizens. But the upside on that is, of course, that now we are kind of entering the Brussels sausage making machine. Now we are really getting political with the conference. And that is one of the learnings I take out of the conference as well, that it is not about a singular citizens participation process. No, the great thing or the interesting idea is how to connect citizens assemblies, how to connect the citizen participation process with the heart of decision making in Brussels. And to reflect on what Herman van Rompuy was just saying, I think there is, I agree in one sense that there is this unique chance now to press the reset button and to use everything what is there for a new debate. On the other hand, I think there are expectations on the side of the citizens. So they really want to see what happens now with their ideas and their proposals and how they are being fed into the political process. And that also, we need to take that seriously. And I think we need to deal with these expectations. Thank you, Janis.
Yes, just some reflections on what Herman was saying. We're not pushing the pause button. What we're seeing is that what is happening in the conference and the working groups and the conference plenary, they're operating under immense time pressure because there is a decision that there will be an outcome of the conference on the 9th of May. And we are having, again, a problem which we've had throughout the entire conference, that actually also in the working groups, there's not enough time to have a thorough discussion about the recommendations and to come up with proposals which are concrete enough. And that is happening while, Herman, you're fully right. We've experienced a watershed moment, we're living in a new era. So actually the conference or the discussion about the future of Europe has now become even more important than it had been before. But the timetable is not being changed. And we still have some of the problems between the constituent parts of the conference. We also see from the council side that there are a good number of countries who are still obstructing the process, and there are not so many who are pushing forward, making sure that the outcome of the conference will be as strong as it can be. But if this is the case, I think what will be important is not only what happens from now until the 9th of May, but what happens after the 9th of May. How member states will be positioning themselves. We have the French elections, that is a point of hindrance, let's be frank about that. But we still have until the end of June with the French presidency. My hope is that between the 9th and the end of the French presidency, there will be pressure coming out of the process of the conference to say we need more fundamental debate, even beyond the conference, and the conference should provide that momentum to have that reflection, Herman, you were talking about, which doesn't end on the 9th of May, and it doesn't end with the conference. But we need to have an agreement and also an idea about what the next phases and stages will be on the debate on the future of Europe in light of the new era we're living in.
Okay, thank you very much. I do want to move on to the future of participatory democracy and that more fundamental debate. But Minister, please, if you wish to react to this suggestion about the pros and cons, if you like, of hitting the pause button, please do. But I wanted to ask you, the report says participatory democracy is here to stay, and this conference should not be a one-off experiment. Most of the sessions of conference conversations that I've had the privilege to moderate, I've asked speakers, is this the model for the future? Can we go back to doing business the way we did before? And the universal answer, I think almost totally universal, has been no. The genie is out of the bottle. This has been set up. This is now got to be part of the way we proceed in future. And the report, and we'll come to this in a moment, looks at different ways you might use what we've learned in the future, different tools. What is your sense of that? Was this for you a one-off experiment, or is this the beginning of a different way of doing business in the EU?
I'll get to that. Let me just maybe start with the first part of your question about the hitting the pause button. Actually, I've thought a lot about this during the last weeks and also discussed with colleagues, because indeed it seems a bit strange to continue with a process about the future when the past has actually haunted us now, and really all the parameters that where we are located in Europe have changed drastically. I mean, this is really, for my generation, the first time we seriously feel insecure, right? So indeed, I mean, for me, really, this changes everything, and it needs to change everything in terms of defense policy, in terms of how strong the EU is in the world, in terms of where we get our energy from, and how fast we have to get out of fossil fuels, and how strong we have to be in protecting our democracy, also with really self-confidence around the world. So for me, that's very clear. But still, then I thought a bit about the process and looked at the citizen recommendations. And if you look at it, a lot of the citizen recommendations that we have are either in areas that are not that immediately affected by this crisis. I mean, a lot of the recommendations are very, very detailed, for example, on animal welfare and these sorts of things, or on a new media platform at the EU level, and so things that have not become irrelevant because of the war. And other examples, as actually, if you read them, and suggestions in the field of foreign policy, for instance, like what I outlined, they actually go in the right direction. They emphasize a stronger role for Europe in the world. They emphasize the need for more sovereignty, also in the field of our economic interdependence, and so on. So I think actually it would be a ways to just basically pause, and then indeed there would be the risk, as someone said, that we never get back to those original suggestions. So I think we need to follow through. Maybe it's also sort of my understanding of I'm a very committed person. So I think once you started a process, you see it through.
And there is a point made, if I could just interrupt, Stefano Soggiu in the Q&A points out that in some areas, he says, in panel 4, citizens made precise recommendations about common defence, and governments and EUs, he says, are reacting somewhat differently. Do we have to repeat the process after the crisis? How do we make them more relevant? So there are areas in which there is a direct link and they may need to be revisited. But we are almost halfway through our conversation already, and I do want to turn to the future of the process. Exactly. So perhaps we can come back on that at the end. I'm sure there may be more questions about it. But
should I maybe address the second part?
In terms of the yes, I mean, is this, we're talking about, you said earlier, and I think Corina said, it is relevant, and Herman said it's more relevant than ever because it's about the future of Europe. As part of shoring up our democratic resilience, has this got to be part of the future now, this way of doing business?
Well, no, because I think we can draw many lessons from how the conference was organized. I think what we need is the citizens' involvement. The panels, I think they are great, and we need to continue having them in the future, also at European level. But please not in the way it's done now in the conference, that it's too broad, too vast, without a clear idea of how to bring everything together. So I think what we need is, yes, we need the citizen panel method, but in a way like it's often a sort of learning a bit from the pitfalls maybe of this conference, and from the lessons that we can draw from this, in a way maybe how, for me, the model of this process has been in Ireland, where they had this great citizen panel on abortion, actually, that settled a decades-long controversy about abortion in a very concentrated 2-year process, focus on one question. And then in the end, it was clear how it was resolved, namely in a referendum. So I think we shouldn't have another process just broadly talking about the future, but really focus maybe on European defense policy. Why not ask the citizens
So yes, participatory democracy, but no, not like this, in summary. Herman, would you, and then I'm going to ask Janis, because that's precisely really what the report looks at, because it looks at ways, where might you use this tool in future? And in what different ways would you use it? Would it be on very specific questions or very broad questions or whatever? So I'm going to get Janis in a moment just to outline what the report says about that. But for you, Herman, can the genie be put back in the bottle?
I will not elaborate on what I said. That would be for another discussion. But no, what also happened in Ukraine strengthens me in my belief that we have to deepen democracy. This is the right moment to bring people again to believe in our political system, because a lot of people didn't believe anymore in the system. So this is the right moment to deepen it. And in the report of the high-level group, which is I think a very strong report, by the way, and I'm not among the authors, not at all. And you have 4 ways of involving citizens on key legislative issues, on the convention, ahead of a strategic agenda, and so on. And each time it's another kind of citizens' involvement. Yeah. Never the same. It's never the same. And I think this is a really productive way to go ahead. From the beginning of the process, also when I was involved in the Committee of the Regions on the future of democracy, my position was this shouldn't be a one-off moment. If it is a one-off moment, then it's more than a missed opportunity. It's creating an illusion that it is creating even disappointment. You consult once in a lifetime the citizens, and then after the conference it's over. Yeah. So we need permanent structures. I agree with the minister. We have to draw the lessons from what happened, but we need permanent structures of involving citizens, not on every issue, but as mentioned in the report, on key moments and on key issues. And then we have to look after what kind of citizen involvement can we have, and what kind of combination between participatory democracy and deliberative democracy. This unique combination. And again, what happened in Europe today, what happened in Ukraine today is for us an incentive to continue that work. The only thing that I would add is, Jacki, for those who are involved in the conference, in some way in the bubble of the conference, of course they fear that there is when there is a pause or when there's an interruption, that they lose momentum. But for the rest of the society, there is no momentum for the conference. Those who are outside the process, they're looking at the conference as what shall we do with that? This, and that is for the overwhelming majority of the people, not the people who are, and rightly so, involved in the process. I can understand that their fears, but you have to look also to the broader picture. And this is really the moment to get a breakthrough. But therefore, we need another kind of procedure in the.
Let me just come to Janis now, because Janis, Herman touched there on hinted at some of the elements here. We have these 4 different tools, different ways you might approach this. And I think the report says, we're not trying to say this is exhaustive. We're not trying to say it has to be one or the other. It's a range of options. Can you just in headline terms, outline what those options are. And then I'd like everyone to react on whether they think they're the right set of options and when we might use them or not use them. Janis.
Yes, just one remark before I do that. One is that to use your language, one of the assumptions we had when we put together these 4 proposals was that the genie cannot be put back into the bottle, and it shouldn't be put back into the bottle. But at the same time, we shouldn't replicate the conference. So it's not about creating a conference of the future of Europe 2.0. We should learn from the lessons of the conference. We should also learn from the lessons of the fundamental mistakes we did before we started the conference, which have a lot to do with some of the flaws of the conference, and then think about what kind of new instruments we need. And then we started again from the assumption saying, we don't need an institutionalized permanent citizens assembly. Yes, we need stronger involvement of citizens, but we think we need to think about at what moment of the EU policymaking process should citizens come in. So we thought functionally, when, where do they fit in, how best to organize it. And we came up with these 4 proposals with these 4 options. Food for thought. There can be also more ones than think of, and one doesn't have to implement all of them, but these were the 4 ones we came up with. And the first proposal was to say that we need European citizens' deliberations on key legislative proposals. So when the Commission comes forward with a major piece of legislation, there should be an opportunity for European citizens to get involved in that process, to provide input through a deliberative process, to contribute to the main orientations which the proposal of the Commission will come up with. So that's one proposal. Second proposal involves a multi-level citizens deliberation on major transformative topics. So for example, with respect to climate change or digital transformation, where we know that these are major moments of transformation, they're political challenging, there's need for public support, there's also need for political pressure when it comes to implementing some of the proposals which come out of European policy making. That should be another moment where you get citizens involved into that, but at an EU-wide level and multi-level deliberation. So at the local, the regional, the national, the European, have randomly selected citizens deliberate about these transformative topics, have a common methodology at the national, subnational level, which we didn't have this time around. And then the key findings and recommendations should be discussed in a European citizens panel. We've seen that this does work. And as the minister said, it would be then more focused on a particular subject, not be as general, and then go put the outcome of these deliberations into what we now call conference plenary. We'll see how to call it in the future, where you then have also representatives of EU institutions, national parliaments, and other EU bodies being involved. So that's the second proposal. The third proposal is what we called a big tent on the EU strategic priorities. Here, the idea was that every 5 years, before we enter a new cycle, we have a group of randomly selected citizens plus elected representatives from all over Europe, from the local, the regional, the national, the European level, coming together. We thought of 500, 600 people coming together and identifying what they believe should be the political priorities for the upcoming political cycle. And that should happen before we enter the phase of the campaign phase towards European elections. So the next opportunity would be in the beginning of 2023 to discuss what the priorities should be from 24 onwards. And the last proposal goes in the direction of a European convention, saying that if we ever have a European convention, that should also involve a citizens' deliberation element. That's not something which is foreseen in the EU treaties, but we think that participatory dimension should be added to the convention. So ask randomly selected citizens from all over Europe to discuss questions and issues to be deliberated in the convention before the convention starts, and have ambassadors from that deliberation also participate in the convention. So these are 4 proposals which come in European policymaking processes at different phases and have different ways of how to bring citizens into the process. And I think that's the way how we should now discuss further when we think about how we will translate recommendations 39 from the European Citizens Panel 2 into something which is more concrete. And we try to bring forward these proposals to influence the discussions in the conference.
I need time to react, for everyone to react to this. So, Minister, you've heard there the different tools. We have specific legislative proposals, big transformative topics, but focusing on one topic, big tent fora, as the report calls it, or before European conventions. Do you think there is a place for any of these, all of these? Are there some you would say, yeah, that I think is a great idea, that I'm not sure would work? What's your overall reaction to those ideas? And same question to all of you.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in general, we need to have these debates. So that's, I mean, that's something very positive that you made all these very detailed recommendations for how this could work. I personally am most optimistic for this tool of citizen fora to work when it's a real specific topic. There's something like a specific legislative proposal, the pros and cons there, or a specific question such as the future of defense cooperation, let's say it, and not to use the word, I don't know, European army, that might scare everyone. But these kind of debates, I think, would be very interesting. I'm not such a big fan of these, like what you outlined, these sort of, what do you think are the priorities for the next 6 months debates? I mean, that's a bit like, what do you think about the future in terms of questions?
Too broad.
And to be honest, also now in my 3 months that I'm in this office, I mean, we already and Herman van Rompuy knows this much better than I do. We already have at the EU level, sort of in the regular institutions, many occasions where we talk about working programs of the Commission or sort of these general priorities of council presidencies, yeah. And I mean, sometimes they can be good to get priorities right, and sometimes it's just a big not very focused debate, let's put it that
So
way.
for you,
right?
yes, but really focused,
Yes.
really specific, and probably a concrete legislative proposal is the ones you would go for.
Yes,
So
and can I add
exactly what they're talking about.
Can I add a tiny proposal of myself in this context, which is that we actually should have a follow-up event for this conference on the future of Europe now that we close in May, and then we say, okay, let's meet again, let's say in a year later, to actually ask the institutions what they have done with the recommendations, so that they are forced to make sort of an outcome report to the conference.
Thank you. Herman, for you, I'll come to you in a minute, Dominik. Herman, for you, do you like all of the, I know this, of course, the report drew on the discussions of the group that you chair, but does not reflect any individual's opinions. So for you, do any of them appeal more than others? Do you share the ministers? Well, I like that, but I'm not sure that one would work.
Of course, what the minister is referring to is the key legislative proposals. Yeah. I think that is foreseen in our report. But I'm less critical regarding the strategic agenda. That's a discussion we have every 5 years, not every 6 months, every 5 years. What are the big priorities for the Union in the upcoming period, in the next cycle? That can be a very interesting discussion. Is it about climate change? Is it about the role of Europe in the world? It's about respecting fiscal rules, and so what are the big priorities for the upcoming period? And involving citizens in the definition of this strategic agenda, I think is very useful. And it is, we can do it every 5 years, and we involve then not only citizens, but we also involve local and regional parliamentarians. So there is a Europe-wide debate about what is the way ahead for Europe in the next cycle. That can be really an interesting debate. Of course, we have to steer and we have to draw conclusions from this event, but it can be useful. But it's not every 6 months; it's every 5 years.
Absolutely, thank you. Just to mention, there is a link to the report in the chat. If anyone hasn't seen it, I do recommend. It's worth a read. Dominik, you wanted to come in. Use all of these tools, some of these tools, and when.
Yeah, I'm a bit quiet today, just listening to colleagues and listening to our guests with their ideas. But that allows me to take one step back. And then I see a former European Council president, a German minister, talking with very deep knowledge about citizen participation. And that wasn't the case a couple of years ago, about new forms of citizen participation. And this is also already a quite tangible result of the conference. So there will be new elements that we inject into the participatory infrastructure of the EU. So we need a participation infrastructure. I mean, this is one of the learnings. The other thing is, the observation is, we wouldn't have had a conference or citizens' assemblies if Brussels had, and all the member states had to agree on the very beginning of the process and all detailed facts. And of course, this is a no-go normally in any participation process when you do not know what to do with the results. So please do not start with the process, then just don't give it a go. But I think it's a very European process. So they kicked it off, we kicked it off, and now we've got to deal with the results. But the results will be positive, I believe firmly in that, when it comes to the future of citizen participation in the EU.
Dominik,
One minor thing I want to add is there will always be criticisms with regard to these processes. And there were high criticisms that experts had a too prominent role, for example, that citizens, they couldn't really steer their own process. And I think we need to be careful also as political observers that we criticize the process, but that we do not criticize the new forms of citizen participation per se, because they can be done differently. And of course, it relates to the broadness of the topics. And I fully agree with Anna Lührmann, the more precise the topic, the better. I mean, it would have been wonderful to have a citizen participation process on migration 2 years ago.
Okay, thank you very much. By the way, just to point out, you were saying how great it is everyone's talking so knowledgeably about citizen participation. Cannot resist reading out what the minister has put in the chat. She says, well, I was a professor at a democracy research institute until September 2021. So perhaps not typical of all politicians in this area. But nevertheless, Dominik, you're pointing to something, Corina, I wanted to come to you, because one of the things the report says when it's enumerated these options, it talks about the fundamental idea is to bring about a cultural change, a mindset change that makes citizen participation, it calls it the new normal. And I'm wondering for you what the key is that. So a brief reaction, if you would, on which options you think are more appealing to you than others. But on that cultural change, on that mindset, could you also say a word about that?
Right. Thank you, Jackie. Well, I think indeed, this is the point, as far as I'm concerned, that we want to sort of normalize participation, to normalize it both for citizens, but also for politicians, so that this becomes something natural in a sense. And to get there, I think the ingredients have to include, well, repetition, consistency, persistency. So we just have to do it by different means and at all levels, and to do it systematically and also consistently. You can't just have a one-off. You can't just involve them every 7 years. You have to find different ways of doing it. And in that sense, the list that we put forward of proposals or ideas is certainly not exhaustive. We have to mention that there is a tremendously vast universe of instruments out there and of experience with participatory democracy, including at national and local level. And there's a lot of experts doing and civil entrepreneurs doing wonderful things. Last month, I learned about the mayor of Rotterdam and what incredible things he's doing in his city. So, you know, this has to become something that we co-create and we co-share, we do together as a European community at all levels. And certainly our proposals are just meant to contribute to that conversation, but and to get our creative juices running, but they're certainly not the only things that can be done or should be done.
So you would favor also keeping all these tools at our disposal, the big broader discussions, the strategic ones, the more specific ones. You don't want to rule any of them out.
No, I wouldn't necessarily rule them out. I mean, of course, we shouldn't get in a situation where we demand of citizens things that are not part of their job. Citizens also have their life and they have their own business to go about.
Yeah.
They don't need to take decisions on behalf of
full-time busy with participatory democracy.
Yes, exactly. But to the extent that we give them the opportunity to voice their opinions by other ways rather than elections, or petitions or traditional instruments, and to the extent also that this involvement raises their awareness and interest in European affairs, I think practicing participatory democracy more and more from now on is a good idea.
Thank you. Janis, for you, listening to this discussion about which tools, when to use them, are there ones that particularly appeal to you, or do you prefer to keep the whole suite of options open? And this culture change, this mindset change, and it goes back to really where we started with the minister at the beginning, when she said she was a little disappointed because it's all been about process and arguing about process and not enough about the substance and the politics of all of this. And so the cultural change would be for people to begin to focus on the outcomes, on the substance, and not argue about the process all the time. That would be part of it, wouldn't it?
First of all, I think that this cultural change process has already started. And what Dominik was saying earlier, if you take a step back and you compare where we stand now to some years ago with respect to how to involve citizens into EU democracy, we are at a totally different level today than we were 2 or 3 years ago. So there are things which are developing. With respect to our proposals, I think that all of these proposals have their merits, and you can discuss which one are needed more or needed less. The important thing is that out of the experience of this conference, we draw the right conclusion that we need to concretely think of how we're going to use citizens' deliberation in future beyond the existing instrument which we already have, because there is already a plethora of instruments. But what kind of new instruments do we have? And we need to have that discussion. And I think we need to have this discussion now, and also find a way of how we will integrate what we have as experience from the current conference into the future by reflecting the new realities which Herman reminded us in the beginning, with respect to the new era we live in, the Zeitenwende which we have experienced, and think of how we will now involve citizens in this, at this moment in time, in terms of thinking more fundamentally about the future of the European Union. Because if we actually are in a new era, and I think we are in a new era, the things which we have to change at European level are at a certain level where we cannot do this without involving citizens. So it is about strengthening EU democracy, but it's also about using these instruments to make sure that we will do the right things in future. And there's a lot we need to do in light of the developments.
Thank you. I'm going to read out, we've got a lot of rather detailed questions, and some of them are more, there's a lot of comment and a bit of a question. So I'm going to take them more in the spirit of comments because we don't have time to address them all. But let me just read out a few snapshots. Cato Leonard says, the minister pointed out a weakness of the conference that it's not widely known about. I conducted the Belgian process of the conference, says Cato, and was moderator in the European Panel 1. Overall, the recommendations advise Europe should communicate more, better, and more targeted to its citizens via new media channels to reach them. She says, is the EU ready to take this into account? I think it's something we'll come back to. Benno Trutken says, the future of Europe depends on the future of democracy. So it goes back to the point Herman van Rompuy made at the beginning. Sandra Uhling talks about having easily accessible videos. People need to understand how the whole process is working. Caroline Pollock-Teal talks about she says, I see an urgent need to combine and analyse legislative proposals like the Fit for 55 package with citizens-led conferences like the future of Europe and critical short-term decisions. So again, wanting, I think, to see all these tools being used, and asks, how can short-term crisis response be strategically aligned with democratizing transformation? I mentioned the question about common defence earlier. There's also comments about how to enlarge the participatory part of decision making and create permanent structures, including building media interest and public visibility. Question really, do we need a permanent citizen assembly that can be activated at certain times or not? Lots more. I really don't have time to read them all. But Minister, I wanted to come back to you and also to Herman van Rompuy on this question of a culture change, because I'm wondering whether you think, and fairly briefly if you would, because we are nearly out of time, but whether you think there is still this tension of representative politicians who fundamentally have a distrust of participatory processes and think, no, we're elected to do this. And they feel that tension, because we're talking here about the two going hand in hand to strengthen democratic resilience. But do you think as an active politician, there is a resistance still? Or do you think the culture change really is underway?
Well, I think the roles have to be defined very clearly. For me, these citizen panels are a way to inspire the political process, to bring new ideas, new life, new priorities, and fresh debates. No, it's and then it's up for the representative bodies then to make the decisions. And I think if these two roles are clear, then the resistance or from some MPs will clearly fade. And I think I've also seen that already over the last years, that this that sort of the acceptance has increased, but it's very clear to be true to the roles. And I mean, also myself as someone who has just rejoined politics after 12 years out of politics, I find it, maybe I notice a bit clearer than politicians who have been now in the job for decades without stop. I notice a bit the sort of the different level of debates, the sort of citizens in a citizen panel, also in the conference now, they talk more really about the problem. There was, for example, a German lady saying, hey, in Denmark, we do it much better with a digital ID than in Germany, for example. And a politician would already give a speech about the pros and cons and data protection and why it doesn't work and blah. But she's just like, I saw it works in Denmark. Why can't we have it as well? Yeah, and I think so we need this kind of freshness. So that's why I'm also skeptical about the word permanent in citizen panel, because I think it needs to be fresh people in order to work.
Thank you very much. Herman, from your point of view, an active politician for many decades, and you were talking, you want to seize this moment to, as you said, it deepen democracy. Do you feel also that there are some representative politicians who see this as a threat rather than an asset, that don't believe it deepens democracy, just believes, they're getting in the way of what we need to do? Is that still there? And if it is, how do we overcome it? Briefly, if you would.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Listening is always difficult. And for sure, once elected, you are most of the time you're in your bubble. In a small country, we are in constant dialogue with citizens, not in depth often, but they're in constant contact with citizens. In a bigger country, they move to Berlin, they move to Paris, and they're in some way at the end disconnected from the daily concerns of the people. And so for me, during my political career, there was at certain moments a difference between the agenda of a majority of people and the political agenda. I can give you many examples of all this. Normally, ecology should have been a major concern for politicians, but we had to wait until there were green parties before we pay attention to it. Migration should have been a major concern for politicians, and then the concern started when there were populist parties. So there is a problem, and therefore listening and discussing, we have to learn it to some extent again. But also within the representative democracy, you have problems, because a local elected man or woman, and there are 1 million elected local people in Europe, they have the feeling that those at the regional and at the national level, at the European level, are not listening to them. So there is a problem within the world of representative politicians. So there is therefore dialogue among elected people, and elected people with citizens is of a key issue. Of course, I fully agree with the minister, and it's also in the paper, in other papers, there has to be a clear repartition of the roles. There is a moment of listening, there's a moment of discussion, and there is a moment of decision. And that moment of decision belongs to those who have been democratically elected.
Thank you. And you make a very interesting point. We're spending a lot of time talking about the future of participatory democracy. Maybe this needs a parallel conversation about the future of representative democracy to fix some of those other issues. We are almost out of time, but Minister, I just wanted to come back to you and ask you a question that I've already asked the others on our panel today, because they've been on previous conference conversations. And I'm asking everyone who comes on conference conversations the same question. And it goes back to what European Commission Vice President and Conference Co-Chair Dubravka Šuica said in March when the conference was launched. She said, the conference will enable citizens from every corner of the EU and from all backgrounds to share their ideas, hopes and dreams in shaping their union's future. If you had one dream as an outcome of this whole process, one thing you hope above all else it will achieve, what would it be?
There's just one word in my head at the moment: peace.
And I think that is a topic we will come back to in a future conference conversations, because we started a very interesting conversation today about how those terrible events in Ukraine are affecting much more than just this process, but also how they are affecting this debate and the debate on the future of Europe. And we had that discussion about what does it mean for, do we continue, do we press pause? We will come back on all these issues, but I'm sure everyone joins you in hoping that this can contribute. And by the way, of course, there were Ukrainian speakers who came and attended a session of the plenary earlier this month. I think a very powerful symbol as well, by involving them in the discussions. I'm really sorry, there were lots of questions today, but many of them very detailed, and we didn't have time to get to them. So I do apologize, but thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for listening to our conversation. Thank you so much, Minister. And thank you, Herman, for taking the time to be with us. As always, Dominik, Corina, Janis, great to have you with us. We'll be back next month with another conference conversation. And in the meantime, don't forget to follow the Observatory on Twitter to be kept constantly informed about its activities and get updates on the conference proceedings and developments. And you'll find some of the answers to some of the questions you asked also by looking on the Conference Observatory website. So thank you all very much indeed. I look forward to seeing you at the next conference conversations. Wish we had another hour, but Minister particularly, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Goodbye.